tardes, good evening, everyone. I am Isabel Durán, the Vice-Rector for International Affairs at the Universidad Complutense. And first of all, welcome and thank you for being here. We thought of doing this in English because we have some English-speaking people at our table, so I hope that is not a problem. I'm speaking to you as Vice-Rector for International Affairs from the enormous honor and pride that it is for the Complutense University to co-organize an international forum, seminar, on a subject that keeps us really busy and worried at Spanish universities and, I guess, European universities in general, Brexit and university. On behalf of the Rector of the Complutense, whom I represent, I would like first to welcome the speakers and participants present, coming some of them, as I said, from the United Kingdom. So welcome, bienvenidos. Next, I would like to express the gratitude of the Complutense University to the British Spanish Foundation, who co-hosts this seminar and is represented here by its president, Ambassador Fidel López Álvarez, to my right. The Complutense is always indebted to the British Spanish Foundation because they sponsor the Queen Victoria Eugenia British Hispanic Chair, whose purpose is to promote understanding and collaboration between British and Spanish universities. It was established by agreement between the British Hispanic Foundation and the Complutense University in 1993, so that this coming year, 2018, will see the celebration of its 25th anniversary. And you will all be invited to the celebration. We will have an academic act and also a social act, and you will receive news about it when it comes. The chair rotates from faculty to faculty every year. And this chair, it has fallen on Professor Colin Robinson, Emeritus Professor at the University of Leeds, who will give some seminars and lectures at the School of Dentistry of the Complutense Universidad. Of course, the King's Group, sponsors of this chair, must also be thanked for, especially since it is represented here by its Vice President, Nicholas Fry. My thankfulness must also be extended to the Europeum, an association of leading European universities, and the Complutense is one of the 12 members, which has sponsored the presence here of its newly appointed director, Professor Hartmut Mayer. It's really a privilege to have a speaker of his stature here today. The SEPIE, Servicio Español para la Internalización de la Educación, could not be out of this discussion on the Brexit, for they are the national agency that runs the Erasmus program in Spain. Thanks so much, Alfonso Gentil, for having accepted our invitation. And last but not least, the ICEI, Instituto Complutense de Estudios Internacionales, the real experts on international relations, also had to be here, and we are deeply thankful to its chair, Professor Isabel Álvarez, for her presence at this forum, to which she will add her expertise on the issue as an economist. Of course, the Complutense University is also represented today through the moderator of this discussion, Professor Jaime de Salas, to my left, and his philosophical outlook will enrich the discussion. He has been collaborating with me personally and with us for almost 25 years now. So thank you, Jaime, for your enthusiasm and your generosity. And finally, my acknowledgements go to Encuentros Complutense and José Manuel García Vázquez's team for the organization of this event in collaboration, as I said, with the British Hispanic Foundation. So I will leave the floor to the experts, but as the Vice-Rector for International Affairs, let me just give a few data about Spain and particularly about the UCM that may maybe help open up the discussion after Ambassador Fidel López Álvarez has said also a few words. Just some facts. For example, European citizens who live and work in the UK are likely to be affected by the result of the Brexit. The National Statistics Office estimates that around 3.3 million of European citizens live in the UK, and approximately 129,000 are Spanish nationals. I think the discussion will run around issues like English as a business, the teaching of English, and the learning of English as a business. The Erasmus program, of course, that runs the program for students and teachers and staff mobility, and European research programs. These are the three main concerns, I think, of Spanish universities when talking about the Brexit. To talk about the first issue, the business of teaching English, there are some 535,000 European students going to the UK to learn English each year. It is a big business, as probably Nicholas Fry will tell us, that generates £3.7 trillion annually and creates 30,000 jobs of British teachers. So I guess they are somehow worried because they see their jobs endangered. The other day, I received one of the newspapers that you get when you travel on the other ground, and some British schools in Great Britain were announcing themselves saying, anybody today can study in Great Britain, in British schools. I don't know if that means that they are lowering down their prices because of the fear that they may lose some of the students, but it certainly is beginning to have an impact. Secondly, the Erasmus program. Let me tell you that in the past 5 years, the Complutense University has moved both incoming and outgoing students to and from the UK, 1,730 students, just in the past 5 years, both in and out. About the Erasmus program, Alfonso Gentil will tell us, but the British agency, the equivalent to SEPIE in the United Kingdom, already is sending warnings and sending news. They say that the Erasmus programs promoting science, education, and culture may continue, I underline may continue, subject to the negotiation as stated in the Prime Minister's speech delivered in Florence on September 22nd, 2017. And finally, Brexit and research. We are all, as universities, involved in European research programs. And again, some data, 28% of the academic workforce at universities is non-British, from which 16% of them come from European Union countries. 16% of them. Around 3,500 of those researchers and scientists are Spanish nationals who live and work and do research in the United Kingdom, 3,500. And the figure rises to 5,000 when considering Spanish scientists working in other research and innovation, public institutions, companies, and administration. So the Horizon 2020 that is approaching us more and more also is endangered. And again, the United Kingdom has warned, and I'm quoting, if the United Kingdom withdraws from the European Union during the grant period, Horizon 2020, without concluding an agreement with the European Union, ensuring in particular that British applicants continue to be eligible, you will cease, you being British researchers, you will cease to be eligible to receive European Union funding. So all of these data are somehow worrying, and this is why we decided to convene you to discuss these issues with members pertaining to so many different institutions connected to university. So again, thank you for being here. Be very welcome, and I now pass the word to Ambassador Fidel López Álvarez for his welcoming words.
Thank you very much, Isabel. Respected speakers, dear Jaime, allow me to start thanking the presence of Carlos Zurita on behalf of Her Highness Margarita Borbón, who is our chairwoman at the Fundación. Today, Brexit is already a very familiar word, but no one really knows what its deep meaning is and what implications would be in our life, in our daily life for us Europeans. Nearly a year and a half has already passed since the referendum, and more than 6 months since the start of negotiations. And hardly a iota the two negotiating teams have advanced on that negotiation. And that has happened mainly for two reasons. One of those is the lack of consensus within the British government, and another one is the different strategic position of both negotiating teams. While the British government prefers and desires to have a parallel negotiations of the terms of the divorce along with the future relationship between the United Kingdom and Europe. And on the contrary, the European negotiating team prefers first to have an agreement on these terms of the divorce, on the Brexit exit, and then obviously a negotiation on the future relationship. So these locus of negotiations are affecting all of us. And the consequence is that what we have is uncertainty, which is what is prevailing at the moment. So at that moment today, I mean, we only have questions and no answers. And this is why the University, Complutense, and the Fundación are co-organizing this event in order to shed some light on possible solutions on the problems that are affecting our universities and our students. There are many, many questions that already the Vice Rector has already mentioned, but I will just refer to one of the polls that the Association of Spanish Researchers in the UK did after the referendum. And the results were very, well, I would say drastic decision making, because 43% of the responders in fact were saying that they will change their plans, their life plans after the final negotiations, and also more than 60% will move from the UK if there is no certainty or security to all of them. There is another problem that probably will be raised here that has not been mentioned before, but is the English study in Spain is affecting more than 50,000 children, 120 British schools in Spain, and more than 4,000 also English language schools here in our country. So we have four prestigious speakers today here that under the control of our friend and moderator Jaime de Salas will certainly enlighten us on the possible solution. Thank you so much for coming, and hope we have good results on the debate. Thank you.
It may not be necessary. Good afternoon to all of you. As moderator of the panel, what I'm going to do in the first place is to briefly introduce the different speakers that are going to take part, and in the order of their intervention. In the first place, it is our pleasure to have with us Professor Hartmut Meyer, Secretary General of the Europeum, and also Professor at Oxford, at St. Peter's College, Oxford. Afterwards, after him, Nicholas Fry, Vice Chairman of King's Group, will intervene. In the third place, Don Alfonso Gentil, who represents SEPIE, el Servicio Español de Educación, who is instrumental to the development of the Erasmus. And finally, Doctora Isabel González, Director of the Instituto Complutense de Estudios Internacionales. So in the first place, I ask Professor Meyer.
Thank you so much. I'm extremely delighted to be here for many, many reasons, and I probably have three hats that are relevant to this debate. As Jaime has said, I'm the director of the Europeum, which is a consortium of leading universities. I'm also a political scientist and the director of the European Studies Center at Oxford University, but I'm also a citizen of Europe, and I'm concerned what happens to EU citizens, both in the UK and British citizens and in the rest of the continent. My understanding is we won't have much of a political debate. We want to look at data, we want to look at analysis, and we want to have a reasoned discussion about that. But we can't really totally separate that from political views, from political convictions, and so on. And I think it is honest for me to say that I have a certain view. I was a Remainer. I continue to be a Remainer. I regret that the decision was made in the way it was made, but I'm not here to convince you that something went wrong and we should all reverse it. We have to accept where we are. And when I was invited to speak about Brexit and universities, I thought it might make sense to address it at 5 levels. One is Brexit as a subject for social scientists, for historians, for economists, for cultural people, and saying, let's try to understand why it happened. Let's try to understand where we are in the process. And the previous speakers alluded to it. We are in a limbo situation that we have different views of where we should go and who makes the first move on where we might end up, and the different strategies and the conditions for moving to the future. The EU laid out very clearly, and you mentioned it, but let me say it is 3 conditions. It is the exit divorce bill. How much does Britain owe to the rest of the European Union? Because they have made commitments that other nations shouldn't pick up. This is about pension liabilities. This is about commitments to existing programs. That's a commitment to a subject, and so on. And it's essentially the question, if you have said you're a member of a club and you have to pay fees, how long do you have to pay these fees for, and what is the price attached to exiting? The second is, and this is, as I said, I'm a European citizen, this is very important to me, but it's also very important to British citizens in the UK, is a clear commitment to the rights of EU citizens living in the UK and British citizens living in the rest of the European Union. And the rights are obvious. What will happen to their pensions? What about mutual recognition of health systems? Do they have secure jobs, and so on? And I think this is at the heart of the negotiation. And the question whether you have accumulated rights that you should actually keep, and if you don't keep it, which court are you referring to? Is it the European Court of Justice, or is there in a special arrangement an arbitration court which has to be set up? Who protects my rights? And I think there is still a different perception. If you are British, you think, well, we said we don't want to be under the supervision of the European Court of Justice. This was part of the reason why people wanted Brexit. We must find a different solution. But if you take it from an individual EU citizen's right, you have the right to appeal to European Court of Justice, and this is suddenly taken away from you. This is something, you are deprived of something which you had before. And this tension about which jurisdiction applies, what can you do about that, that needs to be addressed in one form or the other. And the third one is, and that's an extremely difficult one, which I don't want to go into details, which is about the Irish question, and the question of what consequences does it have for the Irish peace process? What does it mean if there is, if Britain leaves the customs union and the single market? What does it mean for production chains? What does it mean for life, and so on? There are about 400 roads between Ireland and the UK and Northern Ireland. You can't control all of them and check whether customs duties are necessary and so on. These are very practical problems. And so far, the EU says what we have read from the British government is not sufficient to make us content that we can move to the next stage, which is about the future relationships. It's about economic, but also the British government wants to have a comprehensive agreement which addresses, along the lines of, for the experts, the Maastricht Treaty, security, common market, and then home and justice affairs, which means anti-terrorism measures and so on. So there's a lot that needs to be negotiated, and it's a complicating process. Every reasonable person realizes this cannot be done before March 2019. So it's a non-negotiable, in my view, that there has to be a transition period in one form or the other. The question is how long, under what conditions, and so on. Because it's such a concern for both sides, because there is a bit of political theater, both domestically in the UK, but also in the EU, we wait for the German elections, and once they have a government, we must make sure that we survive the conference season in the UK, and so on. There's a lot of theater there, and there's a lot of backroom negotiations to move towards something that looks like a transition arrangement. However, there's still four possibilities. One is we are locked up into a confrontational position, and we have the most chaotic, hardest Brexit that we can find. There is the dream scenario that, for some, we will have the softest possible Brexit and all will be negotiated in fine. Then there is, we will have some form of suboptimal agreement, a compromise that isn't really fit for purpose, but that's what we could get. And then there is still a minority who think it will all be called off in a panic attack and the second referendum, and political support will be there, and so on. I wouldn't rule out any of the four scenarios. To me, and that's my only political statement, the most likely looks like a really suboptimal deal and some transition, and it continues to be a difficult one. It wouldn't be a smooth deal. There wouldn't be no deal. There wouldn't be a reversal of the decision. I think the likelihood to have something which looks awkward to all parties, but better than the ultimate crash, might come out of this. But this is as much I want to say about my first point about analyzing the subject, and we can come back if you have questions about why did it happen, where will we go, and so on. The second one, from a university point of view, is related to what will happen to EU citizens. It is what will happen to EU staff in universities. And the numbers, we heard 16% and so on in different universities is different and so on, but it's crucial. You cannot imagine the UK universities functioning without the people who are there, and there are a lot of European citizens. If I look at my own college, we have a Polish lawyer, we have a Spanish economist, we have a Spanish geologist. I'm German, my colleague in politics is Portuguese, we have a Hungarian senior tutor, and so on. One cannot really think about the institution, and this is just past pro toto, we cannot think about the institution without having already accepted that this is a European space, and so on. And what I find unpleasant to some extent is that the very few voices within the universities who think, and there are not many, universities tend to be Remainers because of all the reasons that we know, the voices who feel that Brexit is a good idea put some pressure on established scholars, but also postdocs, and saying, how long do you want to stay? Do you think you can finish this 5-year project? Don't you want to go back to Hungary? And those kind of things have started to happen, and that's unpleasant. But what I can say is every senior vice chancellor, representatives of the Russell Group. This is an elite group of the universities. They're very, 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 very firm that whatever happens, we need to preserve the rights of the researchers within the institutions, and we need to preserve the collaboration that British universities have with European universities. And I'll come back to that. We have heard some figures, and when I talk about research collaboration, I come back to how crucial it is for both British universities as well as for European universities. Then obviously the second question is not only about the EU staff, but what will happen to the future of EU students? Because so far, and that's sad, the commitment that the government has made is that the fees for 2017-2018 for EU students will be the same as the UK, which has been the case under mutual recognition and so on. But there is no guarantee what will happen afterwards. Not yet. And the question is this part of the negotiation? Can it be solved or not? But if you put yourself into the shoes of an applicant who says, well, the first year I pay 9,000, but no one tells me what I pay for my second year, my third year student. If you want to do a postgraduate degree and you don't know what the figures are, there's some concern, and I will tell you at the end why I'm more optimistic than the alarmist narrative that we have. I'm more optimistic that this will be sorted. But there's objectively uncertainty which leads to different application patterns. We have a 14% decline in EU applicants to Oxford University, while global applicants to Oxford rise. There is some reaction to what is happening from European applicants to our university. And that's not, in my view, a positive outcome. It's quite a negative one if we think about Europe as a common research, education space, and so on. Let me then talk about point 4, which is research collaboration. We heard a few figures. Let me give you the Oxford figure. Oxford University is the #1 university in the EU receiving funds from the European Union. 303 projects currently are funded through the EU, amounting to a total funding of 218 million euro. The next 3 universities are Cambridge, University College London, Imperial College London, and within the top 10 of 2020 Horizon funding, Edinburgh and Manchester are there as well. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 British universities in the top 10 of universities receiving money from the European Union. We have now a Pro-Vice-Chancellor Brexit. His song is the same. If we don't get the money, we cannot operate our university as we did in the past. And I think these are alarming figures. The government has reacted to this and said we can guarantee whatever gap comes for existing Horizon 2020 projects, we will fill the gap. But it is not a long-term commitment that the British government will substitute every loss of income. Our medical science faculty, 35% of research funding comes from the EU. And you can see why this is so problematic for the entire educational and research environment in the UK. I have the chance occasionally to talk to hard Brexiteers. We have John Redwood, for the insiders, he is a committed Brexiteer, but he's also a fellow of All Souls College. He sometimes invites his Brexiteer friends and invites a few voices from the university, and I'm one of them on the other side, because they want to have a sounding board and so on. And David Davis came once and said, we understand in our negotiations the research, preserving the research environment is really, really key. If you go through the Prime Minister's speeches, the various ones, and you find the quotes, she always says we want to preserve the research collaboration and the common European research. And if you're British, you say, yes, that's what we want. But the psychology on the other side is, yeah, I know, you want to cherry pick. You want to restrict migration, you want to do this, but the money you want. And you pay a little bit into the pot, but Britain has been, as far as EU funding is concerned, a net recipient. So they get more out of it than they put into it. And you say, that's unfair, isn't it? Well, what is fairness in terms of this is a competitive process for collaborative research funding, and one can say 2 things. British universities, and I'm German, I don't sound patriotic or whatever, are among the leading universities in Europe. They have a global reach, they have ties to other universities, and collaboration through the UK benefits many other universities. And that position cannot easily be replaced. So even if there is, I can say this, I went to Berlin, and they are quite confident in their own abilities to do research, and they have reasons to do that. And they say, well, maybe it's not so bad that the British universities are leaving, because we get a bigger share of the overall research. And by the way, we know how research funding in the EU works. There is a scientific evaluation, but there's also a bit of a political process behind it. We want to create Europeans. And we know from applications there was always, well, we have new members. If you don't include them, that's not good for your application, right? We want good scientific, but if you don't include a Bulgarian after 2007, your application is not as strong. And there was the implicit, we know the British are difficult buggers. Let's make them Europeans. And by giving them a bit of the research pot, they realize how good Europe is. And there is a bit of a he in Berlin and in France and so on. Now we get more. There's also, this is too much of detail, there is a different type of funding in British universities in terms of a high proportion of overhead which goes into the administration, and there is sometimes student fees which have to be subsidized by European partners in order to make the British partner happy. And they think, well, we have done a bit too much. But before people say he, let's think about Europe as a whole. There are a lot of people who are in British universities and they want to contribute to Europe. And they are world class. I had a medical fellow in St. Peter's who left for Hong Kong. One of our lawyers left to America. He in the short term means we are in trouble in the long term, because not including British universities into these collaborative research frameworks is a loss for Europe as a whole. And that message, I think, I want to send across as someone who likes the Free University of Berlin, because I am an alumnus of the Free University of Berlin, but when they say he, they got it wrong. In a sense that we're all losing out if we don't keep this together. And in terms of the last one, what is the political debate? We can discuss Brexit in any shape or form, but we want to concentrate on Brexit and research collaboration. If universities can make a contribution to the public debate, one is a very strong message that if we want to be, in EU talk, there is the Lisbon strategy. People have forgotten about this, but we want to be the most innovative, competitive economy in the world. If we don't have strong research and we don't have innovation and we don't have European collaboration, we will never achieve that goal. And Britain contributes to it a lot. And what people can do to send the message at 3 levels, to people in their universities, to national governments, as well as to lobby in Brussels for that notion. And there's something called the European research space, and Turkey is part of it, and the economic area countries are part of it. So nothing is lost with Britain actually leaving the EU if we can keep that notion together, and that would be my appeal. The second is, as I said, I not only represent the subject, but also the Europeum, a consortium of universities where we have members from Switzerland and then the UK when they leave and so on. There's something of a European research community that is not entirely dependent on the EU. In fact, it's separate from the EU, and every effort that can be made to strengthen those links independent. We can apply for Erasmus Mundus programs, we can apply, but also we want to strengthen those ties independently from the research pot that is out there. And I'm so delighted to say the Europeum starts a new program, which is partially funded by individuals, foundations, and so on, who feel very committed to this message and saying, in this particular difficult time, it is part of our citizens' responsibility to contribute to networks like that, to keep the research, the teaching, the citizens' networks of Europe together. And I think that's my last political statement. I overstretched my time a little bit, but I'm very happy to come back to those individual elements of Brexit in Europe. So thank you very much for giving me the space. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, fellow panelists. Good. Yeah. The build-up and direct effects of the vote on 23rd of June 2016 have been reviewed and analysed ad nauseam by experts far more qualified than myself. However, there is no denying that the surprise results started to shape British politics, society and economy from the early hours of the 24th of June. We woke up that Friday morning to a scenario unpredicted even by the most Eurosceptic of Britons. Britain had voted to leave the European Union, whatever that turns out to mean. Overnight, sterling lost 10% of its value. The FTSE 100 index fell more than 7%, wiping billions of pounds off the value of companies. And David Cameron, a man who had won a shock election victory with an overall majority, not 13 months before, announced his intention to resign as Prime Minister. That was all within just a few hours of the result being announced. Today, consumer confidence is at its lowest in decades. Inflation has surged to 3%, and job growth has started to lag behind it. Say what you will about Philip Hammond, but I suspect there are factors at play here more than just an incompetent chancellor. My fellow panelists have discussed the varying degrees of implications and how this will affect education, though having spoken extensively to government and diplomatic officials in Spain and the United Kingdom, there is one consensus, and I think we're going to reach it here too, and it's that we just don't know what's going to happen. We do not know what the negotiations will produce, and we do not know what the effects these will have. They all do seem to agree that a hard Brexit is undesirable, but it seems inevitable. This will directly affect education as far as accreditation, both for university and schools, and student and staff visas are concerned. For as long as there have been schools and universities, there have been people seeking to travel to further their education and expand their knowledge. Roger Bacon, William of Ockham, Thomas Aquinas, and Isidore of Seville are but a few examples of early scholars who have travelled extensively, visited universities abroad, and developed theories that we still use and accept today. Theirs and others' legacy lives on today, very specifically in the United Kingdom. The UK is the country with the highest representation of international students in its universities. We have heard the detail of Oxford University from Professor Meyer, but let me share some country-wide figures with you. Of a list of 200 universities across the world produced by the Times Higher Education, the UK has 72 of them. Astonishingly, the LSE counts 70% of its student body as international. It is third highest on the list behind the American University of Sharjah in the United Arab Emirates and the Central European University of Hungary. Other British universities in this list include St Andrews, Oxford, and Cambridge. In the whole of the UK, almost 1 in 5 of every university student is considered an international. They contribute £25 billion to the economy in on and off campus spending. Spain is the 7th EU country that sends the most students to British universities. The immediate impact of Brexit on these figures has been a drop of 41,000 students, more than 10% from one year to the next, reversing an upward trend dating back decades. A recent survey by the TES, Times Education Supplement, suggests that 1 in every 3 of international students are less likely to now study in the UK. The counterbalance to this argument, of course, is that with a weaker sterling, as I said, a weaker sterling makes it more appealing to international players. Beyond the decline in prestige and influence this will bring to British universities, there is, of course, a far more damaging short-term implication, which is funding. Non-EU students pay considerably more, as Professor Meyer pointed out, than UK students, while on average a UK or EU student will be expected to pay about £9,000. An international one will pay easily double that. For the same place, the same resources, the same teaching. An international student is far more attractive to the university. However, at fees approaching £20,000, there's suddenly a real concern that many will not be able to afford it. The number of enrollments currently dropping could continue to do so. The argument in the case for why universities and students in general should worry is summed up by Fernando Galán, former president of the European Students' Union. Mr. Galán draws attention to funding, but also the mobility of students going forward. With tight immigration, it will be less likely that students will gain places, even those that could potentially afford the higher fees. As the Vice-Rector astutely points out, another collateral of this of reduced mobility is the effect on British curriculum schools overseas. Currently, there are 9,500 British curriculum schools overseas, staffed by more than 480,000 British teachers. As of today, and according to the Council of British International Schools, there is already a shortage of 250,000 teaching spaces. With visa restrictions and reduced mobility, this could increase dramatically and make attracting teachers a lot harder. Because yes, parents want British education for the English language, but also for British culture and ethos, elements that can only truly be instilled by natives. All this is joined to give the feeling that international students are no longer welcome in the UK, and that conversely, British citizens are not welcome abroad. Neither of which is true, of course. In fact, according to a survey carried out by the Higher Education Academy, 73% of the British public would like to see the same or more international students in the UK. No doubt mindful of the positive economic impact, but also the prestige that having a university provides to cities and towns like Manchester, Birmingham and Guildford. The We Are International campaign is currently supported by 160 universities and educational institutions and is gaining support. In Spain, there are currently 120 British schools schooling 50,000 students and employing several thousand people, local and international. At King's Group alone, we employ 1,000 people in Spain, UK, Panama and Latvia, of which nearly half are British. Currently, if you go to a British school in Europe and most of the world, the local government recognises the A-level and IGCSE system. That enables you to go to university in your own country, but also the UK, the US, and any European Union university, with one or two exceptions. With Brexit and the potential breakdown of these long-standing agreements and treaties, a scenario now opens up where both school and undergraduate certificates are not recognised internationally. Each country will have to independently reach a bilateral agreement with the UK. I have personally been assured by the British Embassy that neither students, nor their parents, nor staff will have to worry about this. However, negotiations are ongoing. The issues are not limited to these, which I've already mentioned. There are many programs that depend on EU funding, which of course the United Kingdom is a big contributor. Two programs have already been mentioned here today. The Horizon 2020 alone has 80 billion euros funding, with the aim of securing global competitiveness. Most famously, perhaps, the Erasmus program, named after the famed Dutch scholar Desiderius Erasmus, is funded with 500 million euros. And in 30 years since the UK joined the scheme, 300,000 British students have gone abroad to further their knowledge and gain work experience. At King's Group, we have 70 of them this year, from universities all over the UK. At the end of the day, we are talking about the most basic human right, the most basic human desire, the furtherance of our own knowledge, the challenge of the debate, and the development of the next generation. Thank you.
Buenas tardes. Good evening to everyone. I hope not falling down again. And thank you very much for the invitation to the Universidad Complutense from Madrid and to the British Hispanic Foundation. Thank you to my fellow panelists. I think we have received two great speeches before me. I'm not going to be political, as Hartmut has said. I'm working for a technician organism. SEPIE is the Spanish Service for Internationalization of Education. We are almost like British Council, but much smaller in internationalization of Spanish universities. And we are also dealing with the Erasmus Plus program. Spain is the first country in Europe receiving students in the Erasmus Plus program, the third sending students to other countries in Europe, and also United Kingdom is one of the most preferred destinations for Spanish students. So this is an important issue who we are discussing this evening. The effects of Brexit for our system is not completely known. Negotiations are getting on. I agree with Hartmut that it's very we are probably not reaching any agreement before March 2019. That would be very difficult for our system. In fact, for example, in the Erasmus Plus program, there was a new announcement 2 weeks ago, the 25th of October, from the European Commission, the number A05, declaration of the Director General of Education, saying that the admissibility criteria for Erasmus Plus projects, not only for students, but the rest of the projects, K2 and K Action 3, they are not going to admit United Kingdom projects if they are getting out the European Union. They are now warning UK that Erasmus Plus is not going to be applicable to them directly, and they are going to suspend or the financing support to this kind of projects. From our point of view, this is something that worries us. It's not good for any country in Europe because we have a very strong relationship with between Spain and United Kingdom, between Spanish and British universities, and we expect that this is not going to be accomplished because we hope that our relation in Europe will survive this Brexit issue. United Kingdom is one of the best partners for Spain, as I have said. We also think that Erasmus Plus will let what we expect that is United Kingdom keep on being an important partner for the international mobility of students. It's not only a question of the procedures, but also a question of the approval of our commitments. There are other programs that could be affected by Brexit, but we think that these implications of these other programs will not be so affected. Another issue I would like to talk about is not only Erasmus Plus, but the promotion of universities. We have a very strong relationship with British Council. We are part of the Study in Europe initiative. This is a big initiative among European Commission, British Council, the other Campus France, etc. We as SEPIE have begun the negotiations to enter in this project as a big partner of these countries. This project is not well understood without British Council. That means that after 2017, we are going to keep on having this project because this is a project since 2018 till 2020, so it will reach after Brexit, and we are going to be all part of an only project. That means that in the terms of promotion of European universities, we are going to participate, all of us, in the same project. And for our image outside Europe, it's very important that of these big 5 countries of Europe, including Germany, France, Spain, Holland, and United Kingdom, go together, because we are fighting each other. We are not fighting each other inside Europe, but we are fighting with other markets in the world. We are fighting against Australia, United States, China, Hong Kong, Singapore, etc. And in the terms of international mobility of students, Europe should remain together, at least with Europe. This is something we would like to appear in the negotiations of the agreement, because I think we all agree in the, not only in the main agencies of promotion of universities or in the agencies for Erasmus Plus program, but also with all the universities and all the colleagues of all the universities that we talk about this issue. They are hoping in such way that Brexit will not affect the feeling of Europeans, or at least the project. You mentioned your consortium, European. It's not only about the European Union, but we are talking as a continent. For our image outside Europe, I was in China 10 days ago. They are not thinking of us as one country very different from United Kingdom. We are speaking another language, or we have other kinds of costumes, but they think of us about a continent, because we are at the same, well, we are only a third part of the population of China, but the size of the continent is very similar to China, so if they come here, they come to an only continent. And we hope this kind of feelings, of this kind of initiatives, or the promotion of our European system of universities could be spread to the rest of the initiatives we are sharing nowadays. Well, that would be more or less what I meant to say this afternoon. I hope we can discuss later about these issues. Thank you very much for inviting us to this speech. Thank you.
Share with you some thoughts and some data about the relationship or the effects of Brexit on research and innovation in Europe. I would like to start with a very basic idea. Most of you will think that science is international. This is what Isabel wants to tell to us today. Well, it is not so basic if we think that still scientific policy is defined still at the national level. However, more and more what we see is that the scientific advance and the research advance is taking place in the international. I mean, it is not geographically bounded, but the results are more and more, and the indicators are telling us that science is taking place in an international scenario. Not global, but international. So in that context, I would say that universities are considered key actors in the national system of innovation. And it is true that universities are doing high efforts in terms of internationalization in the 3 sides of the triangle that some people are defining as education, research, and innovation as well. So in that particular context, I would like to mention that scientific results more and more is not the outcome of just individual efforts, but as I said, it is an international outcome that we can see at least in 2 main indicators. On the one hand, in the international flows of scientists across countries. On the other, when we see publications, and particularly publication of international co-authors. Benefits from internationalization of science, however, as I said before, are not equal worldwide, but on the contrary, what we see is that this internationalization of science is quite concentrated in just some actors. And both the UK and the European Union are some of the winners of this, let's say, unequal distribution of salary. So Brexit can bring us to take caution about the withdrawal of the UK from the European research area, from the European research. Why? Because we have to think how to reshape this movement, this Brexit effect, and how to redistribute within the European Union of these effects in the, I underline, in the field of research and innovation, of course. So, in a nutshell, the European Union can be considered a very good scenario to analyze international flows of knowledge, international scientific flows. Why? As Hartmut mentioned at the beginning, we have had in the last near 40 years European research policy, which in my view is one of the best in terms of cohesion. I mean, the European Union allows some countries in the European context to improve and to leverage skills, research skills. And this is thanks to what we call the framework programs. I mean, the main tool for planning and defining research policy in the European context. So having said that, all the framework programs, and now we are in the 8th, also it is called Horizon 2020, but all of them has followed some targets which are so relevant for the European economy, such as how to define knowledge-based economies, how to compete in the international market when innovation technology is more and more a key issue in order to be competitive. And even how to face what is called the European paradox. I mean, this traditional science, not applied science in Europe, or even how to altogether face or compete with excellence in the United States system, which we know is a part of it. So having said that, I would say that there are three main issues of concern. The first one is related to the role of the UK in the European system, in the European research and innovation system. Why? All of my colleagues have mentioned before, because of the high quality and rating of British universities, and also because of the power of the UK in terms of technological innovation as well. The second one is related to the positive externalities of European collaborative research, such as networks, such as mobility, publication. I mean, it is not just a matter of economic, it is not just a matter of financial resources or funding. And third, I would say that the consequences can be expected and can be anticipated in three sides: the European Union as such, in the UK, of course, and also in member states such as Spain. There's like a missing position from member states about what is going on with Brexit and what that means for our research. So going very briefly, because I'm the last speaker, well, the British system of research and innovation, just with some data, what we can see is that the UK is among the 3 top countries according to the number of publications. But apart from this, which is also important, it is ranked among the first position in terms of quotation, citation of publication. And this is the indicator, the key indicator of quality and impact of scientific production. Moreover, if we go to the top 10% most cited documents and scientific authorship, what we see, in fact, is that the UK is the third one after the US and the Netherlands. So this at least gives us some measure or some figures on the role of the UK, of the British system. So going to the other part, the innovation, we can take just a very single indicator, which is built by the European Commission, and it is called the European Innovation Scoreboard. And the British position is above the European average on the one hand. Also, its position is, let's say, lower than in northern countries. But anyhow, we can say it is classified as a strong innovation. And it is a country with, let's say, a very good rate in terms of innovative results. The UK has the first position in terms of international co-publications, in those publications which has several authors from several countries. In terms of the number of international PhD students coming to the UK, even from outside the European Union. Also the first position in innovation in SME, in small and medium enterprises. So we have to learn in countries like Spain with a lot of these type of firms, and also in risk capital. That, as you know, is crucial in terms of promoting innovation in capital. Moreover, this has been already mentioned, the British system has the capacity for attraction of talent, particularly in terms of, let's say, just a figure, 26% of mobility in OECD, in the complete OECD, is attracted by the British system. And if we think in terms of the European researchers moving or going to the British system, it is higher than 30,000 people. Well, there is a worry in that case, which is the grant of excellence, the grant which are named as European Research Council grants. So with Brexit, what can happen, or what we can anticipate, is that those excellent researchers can just leave and say goodbye. I'm going to Germany, for instance, because the grant is coming with me. It's a strong case. So going to the age 2020 returns, and in order to also position the UK, it is the first country in number of proposals. In the framework program found collaborative research, so the UK is the first in the number of proposals. It is present in 60% of approved projects. At least one of the partners is from Britain. And the second recipient of funds, I guess that someone has already mentioned this. So 70% of the research budget is going on to the UK. So apart from this, let's say, first data, it is important to remember that they are the first or the leading researchers in areas such as health, food, energy, social and human sciences, also in science, in society, and I will not mention all of them, but it means that excellence in the British case will justify our worry as a member state as well. So, let's summarize from other authors and from other publications some possible negative effects at the two sides of the coin. I mean, on the one hand, we can see the UK, and one of the worries that the reduction of European funds. It means that probably they have to nationalize, if we can use that term, nationalize research funding. On the other hand, it is expected an increase in public funds, government and British funds, or, even worse, the reduction of research activity. It is also a possible negative effect, the reduction of mobility in and out from the European Union. I am talking about researchers' mobility. And also the worry is about the strategic sectors and science and technology projects such as aircraft, space, health, or energy. So let's go to Spain, just to take as an example, a member state possible effect. First of all, no British critical mass in our projects, in our collaborative projects. Second one, the possible reduction of mobility. We will see the data for Spain in the next slide. The possible reduction of international publication with British scientists. And this is also a crucial aspect for our scientific production as Spanish academics. And last but not least, the informal agreements on networking effects. I mean, this is not tangible, but this is for researchers a quite important aspect to be considered as well. Maybe in the long run, but anyhow. So regarding the scientist mobility from Spain, what we can see is that the UK is the second lesson of our researchers after the US. Concerning the publications, and I have taken our publications from Complutense University, what we can see is our is in that graph, in this figure, is that the international collaboration has been, let's say, constant with the UK in the last decade. For instance, what we have observed is that the Chinese came in and they have increased a lot of the number of publications with us, but with British colleagues, the percentage is more or less stable, and between 8 and 10. So, again, an issue to be worried about. So what's going on in the near future in European research and innovation? Let me just share some thoughts. I mean, this is something that is full of uncertainty, so some thoughts and possible ideas to reflect together. On the one hand, time. Time, why I use this as a first aspect, because until the official Brexit or the official withdrawal of the UK remains. So it means that they can get funds and be part of programs. Even they will be part of the preparation of the 9th framework program. But at the end of the story, if all the date keeps as we expect, they will not be within our projects in the next framework program. Second one, the official position of British universities. It's publicly, they have declared an international commitment, I mean a commitment with international cooperation. But this is feeling, this is a feeling, this is not official position, so still this is an aspect of concern. And third, what type of association? There are several scenarios that we can anticipate as well. And there are some national interests from the part of the member states, and the new member's position can be, let's say, can feel some fear about keeping the British colleagues with us in terms of possible scenarios. On the one hand, bilateral agreements, my colleague has mentioned before. Why not? I mean, Spain cannot think in terms of a bilateral agreement in this particular field. Other, Switzerland or Norway association, which would imply at the end that the British universities will stay in the framework program and they will receive funds and also make contributions, although they will not be part of the crucial decisions in terms of research policy. So, just for concluding, I'm sorry if I have taken some more minutes. Let me be a little bit provocative. I would say that after the positive evolution of the European research and innovation policy and the results in the last 40 decades, maybe we are facing that the internationalization of knowledge is under threat because of Brexit. I mean, this is not just a small thing to talk about. Hard Brexit should, for sure, have serious consequences in the long run for universities, also in the field of research, not only in terms of students of mobility. And finally, let me share with you that the analysis of consequences, and I will require some sort of Spanish position about this, that maybe we can contribute to this, should be measured in at least 2 dimensions. Tangible results, which means, for instance, that the scientific publications will be reduced, but also intangible results, which means that international mobility of scientists, as I said before, generate some sort of externalities such as networking, such as, let's say, good personal contacts, and in the long run, which are finally very helpful. So I stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, all of you, for your contributions. what sort of provisional conclusion can we arrive at this point? Well, I would say, hearing what we've heard, first of all, the extreme uncertainty about what is going to happen, that obviously is absolutely counterproductive to the necessary stability that science and higher education on the whole needs. Secondly, and I think this is very important, higher education is a collateral casualty. That is, the Brexit is a political issue, and what it tends to show up is that, unfortunately, inside the political debate, the future of universities, research, etc., is relatively secondary to other issues which really made Brexit take place. And this, in a sense, is negative, obviously. Most of us here are involved in higher education institutions, and we feel how very important that they are. But in another sense, it's a very positive issue, because in fact, we're not talking about two models of research. We're talking about a model of research that depends to a great extent on finance and on having public money to help, and having the required legal framework to work with, and this. But we're not talking about two different models. And not only that, but I think that several of the speakers have stressed something which is very important, and that is that the European community doesn't reduce itself to the EU countries. There are many, many initiatives that include countries that have come in for that. Turkey, for instance, is one of the signatories of the Bologna Plan, for instance. And it shows to a certain degree that we're inside the general flow of globalization. So the setbacks, which obviously are going to happen, will be, I think, relative, taking the view of a generation will be relative, and I think can be surmounted with time. I would wish that Brexit didn't happen, or I would wish that there's a soft Brexit. I think that would be extremely desirable. But I also think that nowadays, in the context in which we're in, there's going to be an internal wish and an internal effort to redo and to compensate the difficulties. So I think that I would obviously thank all your contributions, because from my point of view, they tend to go in that way, or to go in that direction. Now I think the floor is open, and we would wish to hear anyone of the public. Would you mind identifying yourself?
Yes, Javier Fernández from the board of Fundación Hispano-Británica.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman,
Okay.
and congratulations for the panelists.
Anyone who wishes to speak in Spanish, we will do our best to translate.
Thank you. Congratulations again to the panelists for their presentations. Perhaps it's a question, Mr. Moderator, to yourself, and then you may distribute it as it may be convenient. But I understand from Dr. Mayer's presentation that perhaps a solution between the hard versus soft Brexit, which is very difficult to ascertain now how it will turn out to be, would be to find kind of a immune universe for the academic world, to achieve a kind of isolation from the negative impact of Brexit to our universe of academic work. How do you think that civil society can influence towards that goal? And how civil society can help transmit to the negotiators from both sides towards such an immune universe for the academic world? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would ask Professor Mayer in first place to...
Yeah, thank you for the term, the immune universe. And I think if you read let me try to provoke. If we had a hard Brexiteer in the room, they said, I agree with everything you say. We want to cooperate. We leave the European Union, we don't leave Europe. That's a slogan. And we know how important research collaboration is, and there's no doubt about that. We want to continue, and what we offer you, we just continue as we have done before. And we can do it through bilateral agreements. We have wonderful programs with Japan, the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science and the ESRC, they cooperate. We have wonderful programs across the Atlantic. We don't need the EU in order to do what we want to do. How do you respond to that? Because it's one of their trump cards. When the reaction from Europe is, this is cherry picking again. You want everything that benefits you, and you don't want to pay the price for it. You want, of course, special visas for nurses you need. You want special visas for scientists you need. You want all the international students, but you don't want them to stay and take our jobs. But as long as you pay for the education, you're wonderful. But we need to make sure that what we have created in the European Union goes beyond what can be achieved through bilateral agreements. So it is a narrative to say, well, you can't cherry pick because it's integrated research, it's something you can't take it out and then we have the same. And I think sending that message at all levels is one. However, it's also, if you look at the immune universe, we are, as far as research and education is concerned, one of the easy, agreeable areas. And that applies, if you look at Turkey, for example, membership negotiations, there are 35 chapters. There's only one concluded, which is on research and science. If you look at the EU, for example, relations with Azerbaijan, we don't like the government, but what we do is, as an EU, we say we can't reach them, we can't do democracy promotion, but what we do is we put our money into science and education, and there's the Azerbaijani diplomatic academy, and why don't we have a European program, and so on. So it is relatively easy to do this, and this can have a positive effect and a negative effect, because we might not be that relevant because it's so easy, or we might become the trigger to justify continued spending by the UK and the EU funds by saying this is what we really need and we want to continue to contribute to that. The next one will be migration and external borders and so on. So if we can find narratives that justify spending for those who want the softer Brexit, I think we are an excellent example, and we should say, yeah, it's in all our interest. The next one is cooperation on anti-terrorism, Europol, joint research on protection against cyber attacks and all that. So the more narratives we find, the better it is to give those soft Brexiteers a justification for spending into the EU budget in one form or the other. I mean, for me, as I said, I was a Remainer. I remain a Remainer. In my dream world, it wouldn't happen, but I also see the realities. Norway, with a little bit of fiddle, it is still, for me, the ideal outcome of what we will see, and that includes free movement of people, that includes research area and so on. But you can't sell it domestically because you have said that's the worst of all world. We are regulated by Brussels, we pay for Brussels, but we can't sit at the table and design it. But I think politically, if you talk to business people, if you talk to bankers, if you talk to scientists and so on, they all say it's still the best solution, the better would be to stay. But I think what we can do is alert as many people as possible, even the anti-EU people, that this is an area where it's a lose-lose for all of us in Europe. And you can say, well, let's have this wonderful new cooperation with Australia in the Commonwealth and with New Zealand and so on. Yes, but it's stronger if you bring your New Zealand networks into European networks that have already benefited from joint research. If we look at where are we leading in Europe, we should be depressed about our research in some medical research and some science in physics and so on. We are world class and we want to remain world class, but we are world class partly because we bring the European talent together in collaborative research projects. And then we are attracted to the New Zealanders and the Australians and the Americans and the Singaporeans because we are world class. But if we lose that competitiveness because we lose the base, then you can't sell anything to those wonderful opportunities and so on. And to make sure in the hard scientists, CERN, big research projects and so on, without some pooled funding, neither the UK nor Europe would be in the position they are in. And I think to get that message across is what civil society can do, should do, and use opportunities to influence policymakers and so on. What is depressing from my point of view is we call it collateral damage. There's so much collateral damage because there was so little preparation in the UK for the consequences for business, for banking, for research, for the health service, for this and that. There's so much collateral one, which makes me frustrated about the lack of preparation and not thinking it through and coming up with funny ideas and thinking, oh, we just get rid of Europe and then we are free to do it with the rest of the world. But stop me, it's a political. It's not a scientific talk, so I have to restrain myself in my frustration. But that's my answer to that.
Alfonso Gentil, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to subscribe all the words Hartmut has said. I think soft diplomacy should be our future. We should strengthen our work on education and scientific cooperation, because Brexit should be also a political matter, should not affect our scientific cooperation or cooperation between universities. But okay, it's going to be difficult. It's not going to be easy to maintain all the Horizon 2020 Erasmus Plus programs advantages. Those advantages are thought into a common European Union. As said before, we should work more in a continental Europe. Well, if we maintain bilateral agreements and we maintain this kind of scientific cooperation through the agreements, we could cooperate. But well, the importance of the budget, the 280 million euros, for example, that the EU funds the research in British universities, that part is, well, is something that worries us. But from our point of view, we are part of the Ministry of Education. We are writing notes on trying to reach the ministry and then the government and then the European Union that in the negotiation, education should be maintained into something similar to the European Union. This is something we would like to be done, but it's not going to be easy. Sure.
Doña Isabel Durán.
Excuse my intervention, although I'm not part of the table, so to say, but as the Vice Rector for International Affairs of the Complutense, I run the Erasmus program at the university. So let me descend to the practicalities of this, what you have called very thoughtfully, immune universe. Immune universes need or require funding apart from bilateral agreements. So when the Brexit was announced, we as a university that receives the highest number of Erasmus students in Spain, we received letters from many of our British partners saying, do not worry, we are interested in continuing with our student mobility. I'm going to talk only about student mobility. Of course, Erasmus Plus includes many other issues, but student mobility. Don't worry, we shall sign bilateral agreements. The program will keep running. This is not going to be the end of the Erasmus program. By the way, I think the Erasmus Plus program is the best academic invention in the 20th century. And of course, we would like the university or higher education to be an immune world, but let me descend to the facts. Every Erasmus student, for mobility purposes, receives an average quantity of 250 euros per month to spend 5 to 6 months in a European university. Okay, so if we come down to the data of the Complutense, 2016-17. There were 386 students moving from UK to Complutense, from Complutense to UK universities. That amounts to an average quantity of 2,100 euros per student. We multiply that by 386 students, we come up with the figure of 210,000 euros. Now, is the British government going to finance 810,000 euros per year for student mobility just to the Complutense University of Spain? I don't believe it. I don't believe it. So the Erasmus program is absolutely going to be affected by the Brexit. Absolutely. Either the mobility will be altogether finished, or the students will have to find private funding, or the British government, some universities will have to find ways of financing their students and also the incoming students, because of course this is a bilateral movement. You cannot only finance your own students to go abroad and expect the other universities to receive your students but not to send their students to your universities. So it is definitely going to be affected. I don't think there's an immune world in higher education. It is definitely going to be affected.
Good. Would you like please.
Hi there, thank you. I always hesitate to out myself at events like this, but I'm Tim Hemmings, the Deputy Head of Mission at the British Embassy. And I wanted to thank the Complutense and the Fundación for a really excellent event, and for the various interventions, which were all excellent, and agreed very much on the kind of the principle that sort of uncertainty is bad. And I certainly share that. I think uncertainty is always unwelcome when you're trying to plan your life, you're trying to plan a business, or you're trying to run an institution. So I fully share that. I think there has been some progress, though, on some issues that perhaps wasn't mentioned, and I'll just mention that quickly and then ask a question. I mean, firstly, to say over the summer, while the negotiations with the EU have been going on, the UK published 10 papers which weren't mentioned, and one of those was on science and innovation specifically, and actually does go some way to answering some of the questions that came up in the sense that it sets out what we would like kind of cooperation between the UK and the European Union to look like in the field of science and innovation after we leave. And it's a 10-page long paper, I won't summarise it, you can find it on the website of the Foundation or on the gov.uk website, but basically it looks to have the most possible close cooperation in the field of science and innovation possible, for all the reasons you set out so eloquently, because the UK benefits massively from it, not just in pure sort of financial terms, but in terms of the kind of exchanges, and it is a win-win, I think, as Hartmut put it. My question, therefore, is there's still some uncertainty, but if you look at that, if you look at Theresa May's speech in Florence, in which she sets out the kind of offer for EU citizens living in the UK, if you have those sort of proposals on the table, I guess my question, perhaps for the Spanish members of the panel, would be what approach should the Spanish government take in response? Because one of the things we're kind of waiting for, in a way, is the response of the EU27 to the kind of proposals we've set forward. As you know, we were very keen in October to move on to discussing the future relationship. The EU27 decided that wasn't the time to do it. But as we move forward into that discussion, what approach do you think would be most effective here from Spain? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Isabel Iglesias.
Well, question, and also it is difficult to give an answer as such. I would say that at least in the field I was exploring in terms of research, it is quite difficult to figure out that the Spanish government, although in the scientific policy they can think that the best scenario would be still keeping cooperating with the British universities, in terms of the budget it implies. I mean, this is some main constraint. I mean, I would say that also some, let's say, suggestions they perceive can go in that direction. The issue is how to fund this. I mean, even if a bilateral agreement can be thought, which is a good solution, the issue is how to fund this in terms of our budget constraint. Well, there is also some sort of special aspect that the government, the Spanish government can be interested in take care of, which is the public-private collaboration, also the public-public collaboration. I mean, there are some sort of ideas, but until my knowledge, maybe nobody still will say something else, until my knowledge, there is not a national position or a Spanish position allowed.
No, I would just add that I think it's perhaps disingenuous to believe that the Spanish government will do anything without the backing of the other members.
Yeah,
So
that's what
the
I'm
Spanish
going to say
government is unlikely to have a position unless it's a common position.
Yeah.
And the diplomatic, well, as you well know, I think the diplomatic position at the moment is Britain calls it, let Britain come and see what they offer. And until that's unblocked, the Spanish government's not going to have a position, I suspect.
Good.
Yeah, I'm not part of the government, but I work for the Ministry of Education. I agree that I'm afraid the government of Spain will do more or less the same as other governments of Germany, France. The common position will be discussed the backward, and then we'll reach the same agreement as the rest of the countries. I'm sure they're not going to reach an agreement very opposite from them.
Thank you. Please.
El micrófono.
Thank you very much. I'm Andrew Graham from Oxford University. I'm the Executive Chair of the European. I wanted to ask or put a rather different point than the one that's so far been on the table. I think it lies directly under your heading of Brexit and university, or I can make it lie under that heading. It seems to me that we all observed something rather common going on across the world. Of course, there are national differences, but there is some similarity between what happened with Trump and what happened with Brexit. And that was a rise of a set of views which showed themselves in votes, where people were extremely angry with the parties in power. And they were angry with elites. And the universities were undoubtedly part of that elite. So part of your question about Brexit and university might be rephrased as populism versus universities. And I think there was a major challenge to all universities. And I have a bit of a solution, but only the beginnings of a solution. And the major challenge is this. Over the last 150 years, I mean, more or less since the Age of Enlightenment and the Scientific Revolution, knowledge has just exploded. And the way that I put it is it's gone more and more centrifugal. People go more and more outwards to the very frontiers of knowledge. And they therefore get further and further away from anybody else in the rest of society who can understand it. And so there's a gulf going on between our ever perfectly sensible, extremely good idea to get more and more knowledge. But most people don't see that this incredibly detailed work that this geneticist is doing might have anything to do with the illness of their aunt. There's just no connection.
And even less so do they see the connection between the work in the humanities and the social sciences, between the lives that they lead. And they got cross, and they blamed us. And that was partly because we had become a bit too immune. And we are reliant on public money at the end of the day. Even if it's not public money, it's private money that somebody else has got to give you. It's not our money. So I think all of us in universities have a really major challenge, which is to think how to reconnect ourselves with the people who are going to fund us and support us. And if we don't do that, we'll get more Brexits and more populism. And the age of enlightenment will disappear more and more into the distant past. And what's my partial solution? My partial solution is that we need to think about this much more when we're doing our education, and we need to think about it much more in terms of our relationships with our alumni. We need to keep in touch with alumni and keep explaining to them what we're doing and why we're doing it. Because in a lot of countries now, something like 40 to 50% of the electorate were alumni at one stage or another, or will be, if the numbers are going through universities continue. So we ought to be able to challenge, to break this. But if you say to my scientific colleagues in Oxford, spend time explaining it, no, I don't get a research grant for explaining myself. Didn't really a question,
No.
Emerging
No,
Jaime
no, no,
to
no,
respond to that question.
No, well, offhand, I can't really present a counter-argument. I think that what you pose is a very real problem. What I think is that universities have become extremely expensive, need a lot of money, and there's also very much a wish to get into the elite. So you have populism, those who don't get into the elite, but you also have a market of people that want to get into elite and will pay a lot of money and will be ready to emigrate, to go to other places, to be able to say that he or she has a doctorate in Oxford or whatever. So I think that the two questions are playing there. Offhand, I would say that where I think that there's a divide, at least in this country, there's a divide is between secondary education and university. I think that this is an extremely important issue. I think that secondary, and thinking in terms of humanities, I think that science, I'm not too sure that people don't think that research has anything to do with one's illness. I think that there is a certain acknowledgement of that. But I do think that, for instance, to be a specialist in Latin verse, for instance, is something which people will think, is it really necessary to fund someone over years to become I do think that that's out there, and there's a certain resentment and a certain bad image of professors because of that. I quite agree with you there. I think that part of the problem is that secondary education, at least in this country, should be revised to make the entry into university something which is a continuation and not and to make it relevant in that fashion. That's the answer. But there is a problem I would like to pose, or there's an issue, and trying to strike a more optimistic note in this discussion, which is the Bologna Plan. Now, the Bologna Plan has been enacted. I think that England, among other, England has complied or has taken steps to it. Certainly in this country, many millions of man-hours were spent trying to adapt ourselves to Bologna. And really the issue there is not the sort of political success of having a plan enacted. The real issue is to what extent that has been effective. If it has been effective, effective. You have created, at a certain level, a European space. But I think that the run-of-the-mill of academics go on doing the same things that they did before. And the Bologna Plan was, in a sense, thought up in the context of what you've been thinking. And I think that if we were to think about this issue, or if we were to pose this issue academically or bureaucratically, one would have to think to what extent the Bologna Plan has been successful and to what extent it has met the hopes of those that enacted it initially. And I would ask you perhaps to give us your take on this.
I mean, I want to, if I can, address some of the issues that Andrew posed. I think we have to sell the universities and their contribution to society much better to those who do not understand or see it as part of expert elites and so on. And there are various ingredients. One is politicians have to make the case and not play into the professor from Heidelberg and try to exploit this anti-elitism for their own benefit. And I think too many politicians still think they can vote by blaming, classicists and funny people in privileged ivory towers and make fun of them. That's not helpful, because the narrative has to be any problem that you identify needs a solution where universities play a part. Tell me your problem: unemployment, race relations, contribution. Because one of the reasons why, and I think I can speak to all of us who work in universities, why we work in universities, because it's that special place in society which links business, technology, education, politics, the protection of the environment, whatever, without the central position, freedom of speech, a forum of debate, and so on. That case has to be made. And I think politicians, but also academics, have to make that case. The real problem is access to that wonderful world, which a lot of people think they are not being part of. So it has to be linked to a narrative about access. We see the expansion of students in universities going up to some extent. But if we look at really deprived working class backgrounds making it into universities, it was better in the 60s and 70s than it is now. Because the precariat and so on, they don't see any chance of being part of that and so on. And therefore, and if you're in Oxford, any accusation of elitism hits you all the time. That's why it's so important for us to make a case for reaching out to talent that is there. We have the problem with an elite university like ours that we cannot lower standards. We have to combine these two narratives. But I think a diverse university system which caters to different levels of abilities and different programs has to be sold by us as people in the universities, but we need businesses and we need politicians to help us to make the case. Because I can link every problem that anyone who feels marginalized has something to do with universities, be it medical research and so on. I don't have to go further than that. And I think we need to reach out and we need to get out of the ivory tower and make the case. And as much as we can do it, help universities to keep that central position in societies, both at the national, at the regional, at the city level. They are innovators for small and medium-sized businesses and so on. So I think we can defend what we are doing. We just have to do it in different language and combine the different narratives. I just wanted to add to that. And I ask myself whether I've done enough in terms of, because I believe Brexit is a mistake. Have I done enough? Probably not. Would I have been a good ambassador? Everyone says, you are German, stay out of the debate, because the only foreigner that we accept explaining this to us is Ireland. Because we have long, and but you as a German, you better shut up, because you have the opposite effect on the Brexiteers. So I followed that advice, and I still have sleepless nights saying, have I done enough, or was it the right advice that I should not speak? And instead of Wolfgang Schäuble getting involved and Angela Merkel getting involved and the French, is that a good or bad thing? What did it trigger? And so on. So I decided to be more reserved than I normally would have been. Whether I made the right choice or not, I don't know. And whether it would have helped if I had gone. I mean, Anand Menon is a colleague who went to Newcastle, and they did reach out and they tried to make the case. But when Anand comes back and says, he always mentions this incident in Newcastle when he made the economic case why there's a positive scenario for staying in, and saying the loss of GDP will be this and this. And he says there was this person in the audience who said, it's your GDP, it's not mine. And it's this disconnect that it's all about money for the elites, and whatever, if you lose 2% or 3% or whatever figure you give me, it doesn't have any effect on my life because you have given up on me anyway. And if you lose 2%, great, because you feel it as much as I have felt it for a long time. And this is the same type of mentality that you find in parts of Virginia. I mean, they don't like Trump, but they want to send the finger to the elites. And I think we can turn it around, and we shouldn't give up, and we are not victims of populism everywhere, but we certainly need to engage with those constituents much better than we have done in the past. Whether it's an Oxford Don with a German passport, I'm not sure.
Well, with that note, thank you very much, and I think the time is up, and I must, in the name of the two organizers, must thank you for your presence and say goodbye.
Thank you.